The sun hung low over the Blackwood Ranch, painting the dust in shades of burnt gold as Eleanor Graves shuffled down the dirt road, her spine bent like a wind-worn fence post. That scuffed alligator skin suitcase in her grip, worth more than the entire spread her son Wyatt had just banished her from. By tomorrow, the fool would learn that kicking out his mother wasn't just a betrayal, it was signing his own ruin. Behind her, Wyatt stood rigid on the porch, his new wife, Lila, coiled around him like a rattlesnake in a silk dress. Took her long enough, Lila purred, thumbing the emerald brooch at her throat, one of Eleanor's heirlooms purchased during last week's inventory. The suitcase creaked as Eleanor adjusted her grip, the weight inside shifting with a telltale clink. Odd for a woman supposedly stripped of everything. Wyatt's boot scuffed the planks. For a heartbeat, he saw her, not this stumbling figure, but the woman who'd held the ranch together after the blizzard of '78, who'd bartered her wedding pearls for medicine when he'd nearly died of scarlet fever. His fingers twitched toward his hat, a gesture he'd done since boyhood, tipping it to her each dawn. Lila's nails sank into his wrist. "That's pity talking," she hissed. "Remember the ledger." The ledger! The damned ledger Lila kept like scripture, every line item a nail in Eleanor's coffin. As the old woman reached the cattle gate, a tumbleweed caught on her skirt. She kicked it free with a sudden vicious precision that made Wyatt blink. Then with a hitch of her shoulders, she straightened just enough and tossed him a glance over her shoulder. Not a plea, a reckoning. The desert wind carried her voice roughened by whiskey and wisdom. "Funny thing about roots, boy, they grow deeper when you try to rip 'em out." Lila snorted, but Wyatt felt the first trickle of doubt snake down his spine. That suitcase wasn't just heavy, it was loaded. Wyatt's fingers trembled as he picked up the fallen letter, the paper whispering like a rattlesnake's warning. Lila snatched it from him before he could read it again, her eyes darting across the lines, then widening as the color drained from her face. "This is some desperate trick," she spat, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. The ink was fresh, too fresh. And the wax seal bore the Blackwood crest, the one Eleanor had kept locked away since Wyatt's father died. Outside, the crunch of boots on gravel announced their uninvited guest. Judge Elias Caldwell, a grizzled relic of the territorial days, stood on the porch, his shadow stretching long and crooked across the floorboards like an accusation. "Afternoon, Wyatt," he drawled, tipping his hat with mock courtesy. "Your mama sent me to deliver a clarification." He tossed a bundle of documents onto the table, the top page stamped with the courthouse seal. Lila lunged for them, but Caldwell's cane came down hard on her wrist. Ah, darlin'. This party's for the grown-ups." Wyatt barely heard her yelp. His eyes locked on the deed, the real deed dated 2 days after his father's funeral. Every inch of Blackwood Ranch, every head of cattle, every blade of grass signed over to Eleanor Graves in perpetuity. The truth hit him like a shotgun blast. He'd been squatting on his mother's land for a decade, playing cowboy while she let him. And Lila. Her precious expansion plans were just pretty words for theft. A bitter laugh escaped him. "All that scheming and you married a tenant." Lila's porcelain composure shattered. "You idiot!" She hurled the ledger at him, pages fluttering like dying birds. "I bankrupted my first husband for this," Caldwell chuckled, lighting a cigar with deliberate slowness. "Funny how life works. Eleanor's over at the Silver Saddle right now buying drinks for the whole town. Seems she's celebrating her retirement, on a certain son's dime." The old judge savored Wyatt's flinch before dropping the final knife. "Oh, and Wyatt. That loan you took out last month, the one against the ranch." He blew a smoke ring toward the ceiling. "Bank's got a new favorite customer. Goes by Graves. Outside, a thunderclap split the sky, dry lightning, the kind that starts wildfires." Wyatt didn't notice. He was too busy watching Lila's trunk hit the dirt road, her silk dresses spilling into the dust as she screamed at the hired hands. Somewhere beyond the ridge, Eleanor's laughter echoed, carried on the wind like a promise. Every dog gets its day, boy. And yours just rolled over and died. Wyatt's knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the kitchen table, the mortgage papers trembling like leaves in a dust storm. Judge Caldwell took a long drag from his cigar, the ember glowing like the devil's own grin. Funny thing about secrets, he mused, tapping ash onto Lila's prized Persian rug. They fester in the dark, then bloom like poison ivy when yank 'em into the light. Lila, her face a mask of fury, whipped around to Wyatt. You knew about this. Wyatt didn't answer. His mind raced back to every time his mother had disappeared for errands in town, every time she'd quietly slipped envelopes to the postmaster every damn Sunday. She'd worn that same faded blue dress, her armor, he realized now. She hadn't been poor. She'd been untouchable. Caldwell tossed another bombshell onto the pile, a ledger with entries in Eleanor's precise handwriting. See here, $837 a month. Like clockwork paid to First Territorial Bank since the year your daddy died. He flipped a page, revealing a column Wyatt had missed. Wyatt's folly, scrawled beside a list of reckless expenses, Lila's new piano, the silver-plated spurs, the ill-fatted cattle drive that had lost them 200 head. Your mama kept receipts, son. For everything. Lila let out a shriek that startled the crows outside. That scheming old hag. She lunged for the ledger, but Caldwell was faster, tucking it inside his coat with a wink. Bank opens at 9 sharp tomorrow. Eleanor's instructions were clear, not a cent more. He tipped his hat toward the door, where two ranch hands, her ranch hands now, were loading Lila's trunks onto a buckboard. Best start packing, Mrs. Blackwood. Or should I say, Mrs. Graves. The room spun. Wyatt's throat tightened as he did the math. 6 days to come up with $800 with empty coffers and a herd that wouldn't fetch half that. Outside, the wind howled through the canyon, carrying the distant clang of the Silver Saddles piano, where no doubt Eleanor was holding court, buying rounds with his inheritance. Then came the twist of the knife. Caldwell paused in the doorway, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Oh, and Wyatt. That investment your mama's been managing, he flicked a bank draft onto the floor made out to the Red Canyon Mining Company. Turns out there's silver under them south pastures. Been leasing the rights for years. He chuckled as Wyatt's knees buckled. But don't fret. The lease expires. Tomorrow. Lila's scream curdled into something primal. Wyatt barely heard it. All he could see was his mother's face that morning, the way she'd hesitated at the gate, not from weakness but from mercy. And he'd let her walk away. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. Or maybe it was laughter. Either way, the reckoning had come home to roost. The moon hung like a tarnished silver dollar over the desert as Wyatt urged his horse onward, the animal's flanks heaving with exhaustion. Silver Creek. The name alone tasted like betrayal. Uncle Thaddeus Graves, the man his father had called that thieving snake, hadn't been seen since Wyatt was in short pants. Yet somehow Eleanor had known exactly where to find him. A coyote yipped in the distance as Wyatt spotted the faint glow of a lantern. Up ahead, Jimmy Caldwell's wagon stalled near Dead Man's Gulch with a busted wheel. Jimmy himself sat on a rock, whittling a stick with far too much calm for a man stranded in outlaw country. Took you long enough, he drawled as Wyatt reined in his horse. Your ma said you'd come charging after her like a bull in a china shop. Wyatt's pistol was out before he could think. Where is she? Jimmy didn't even blink. Gone. Changed rigs at the Gulch. Hired Elias McCready's stagecoach, the fast one, with the 4 thoroughbreds. He nodded toward fresh tracks leading west. Funny thing, though. She left you a present. Tossing aside his whittling, he kicked at a burlap sack near his feet. It clinked. The sack held 3 things, A rusted cattle brand, the original Blackwood iron, last seen the night Thaddeus disappeared, a whiskey flask monogrammed with his father's initials, and a slip of paper that read, "Ask Jimmy about the Christmas of '78. Wyatt's blood ran cold. That was the winter the cattle had vanished, the winter his father had nearly bankrupted the ranch. Jimmy sighed, pocketing his knife. "Your daddy didn't lose those steers, boy. He sold them. To Thaddeus. For seed money to start over in California. He spat into the dust. Eleanor was supposed to go with him. But then the blizzard hit, and your daddy, well, he never made it past the pass. The pieces crashed together. The investments, the secret payments, the way Eleanor had worn poverty like a disguise. She hadn't just been protecting the ranch, she'd been atoning. A gunshot cracked in the distance. Jimmy stiffened. That'll be McCready's coach hitting the relay station. He met Wyatt's eyes with something almost like pity. Your uncle's waiting at Silver Creek, boy. And if I were you, I'd pray like hell I got there after Eleanor. Wyatt didn't need to be told twice. He swung back onto his horse, the flask burning a hole in his pocket. Somewhere ahead, his mother's suitcase full of secrets was racing toward a reckoning 40 years in the making, and he was the only fool desperate enough to try and stop it. The desert wind carried a new sound, then laughter deep and rasping rolling down from the canyon walls. Or maybe it was just the echo of his own stupidity. Either way, the game was up. The truth was coming. And Wyatt Blackwood was about to learn what happened when the past finally collected its due. The documents Magnolia slid across the table gleamed under the lamplight deeds contracts, and a map with a red circle around Blackwood Ridge. Wyatt's knees nearly buckled. That was the worthless stretch of land he'd nearly sold to cattle baron Hank Rutledge last spring. The barren patch Lila had called an eyesore. Then came the twist that would haunt him forever. Uncle Thaddeus tapped the map with a grin. Still can't believe Robert named it after himself like some damn king. Blackwood Ridge. Should have called it Graves' Gift, seeing as how my geologist found the silver first. He chuckled as Magnolia shot him a warning look. Oh, relax, Maggie. The boy's probably still licking his wounds back at the ranch. Ain't no way he... The window shattered as Wyatt's boot crashed through it. He tumbled into the parlor whiskey flask in one hand, rusted cattle brand in the other. You scheming son of a... Yes, Thaddeus moved faster than any 60-year-old had a right to a Colt peacemaker appearing in his hand like magic. Well, I'll be damned. The pup's got teeth after all. Silence. The kind that comes before gunfire or grace. Then Eleanor did the unexpected. She laughed. Not the tired chuckle Wyatt knew, but a rich, unburdened sound that filled the room. Took you long enough? She said, nodding at the brand in his hand. I wondered if you'd recognize your father's handiwork. Wyatt stared at the rusted iron. The initials weren't RB for Robert Blackwood. They were TG burned upside down. A brand meant to be read from horseback. A brand for stolen cattle. Thaddeus holstered his gun with a sigh. Hell, Maggie, you were right. He is Robert's son. Reaching into the suitcase, he tossed Wyatt a lump of ore that nearly broke his fingers. Welcome to the family business, kid. That there's worth more than your entire herd. Outside, a coyote howled. Or maybe it was the wind. Or maybe it was Robert Blackwood spinning in his grave as his son finally learned the truth. The ranch was never the inheritance. The struggle was never the story. And Eleanor Graves hadn't just carried a fortune in that suitcase, she'd carried 40 years of receipts. Now it was Wyatt's turn to pay up. Wyatt's fingers tightened around the rusted cattle brand as Clementine No Lila stepped toward him, her silk dress whispering like a rattlesnake's warning. Well, she demanded, her painted lips curling. Did you beg your mama for mercy like a good little boy? The morning sun caught the silver streaks in her hair streaks that hadn't been there yesterday. Wyatt almost laughed. Even now she was performing. Then he noticed the packed trunk by the door. Going somewhere, his voice sounded foreign to his own ears, calm like the eye of a storm. Lila's smile faltered. Don't be dramatic. I simply organized our valuables in case. Her gaze darted to the ledger, still lying open on the table, its damning columns exposed. Wyatt moved then, not toward her, but to the fireplace. He tossed the cattle brand into the flames, watching as decades of rust flaked away to reveal the truth beneath not TG, but RB, the letters warped from heat. A brand meant to be changed. A lie meant to last. The mine's real, he said, watching the iron glow red. Always has been. And you knew. Lila's porcelain mask cracked. Of course I knew that senile old bat was sitting on a fortune while we scraped by. She lunged for the ledger, but Wyatt was faster, slamming it shut with a thud that shook the windows. Outside, a horse whinnied. Judge Caldwell's voice carried through the dawn. Bank opens in 1 hour. Wyatt, you coming to settle up? Or surrender? Lila's breath came fast now, her eyes wild. We can still fix this. Take the money from the coffee tin ride to Silver Creek and what Wyatt's laugh was bitter as chewing tobacco. Steal from my mother again. He reached into his pocket and flung the silver ore onto the table. It landed with a clunk that made Lila flinch. There's your pathetic old woman. There's your dead weight. The clock ticked. Somewhere a coyote howled. Then came the sound that would haunt Wyatt forever, the snick of a derringer being cocked. Lila's hands shook as she leveled the tiny gun at his chest. I won't go back to nothing, she hissed. Wyatt didn't move. Just stared at the woman he'd married, seeing her for the first time, the calculating glint in her eyes, the desperation in her grip. The same look she'd had when she'd found that lost cattle contract last winter, when she'd convinced him to fire the old foreman. The truth hit him like a stray bullet. She'd been hunting this mine from the start. Judge Caldwell's shadow filled the doorway. Trouble, son, Wyatt exhaled, made his choice. Nope. He stepped aside, nodding at Lila's trembling hands. But Mrs. Graves here seems to be holding up the proceedings. The derringer clattered to the floor as the judge's men moved in. Lila's scream curdled into something raw and ugly, the sound of a gambler who'd finally lost. Wyatt didn't watch them lead her away. He was too busy staring at the sunrise over Blackwood Ridge, where the mine shafts glittered like open wounds. Somewhere out there, his mother was waiting. And for the first time in his life, Wyatt Blackwood was ready to meet her not as a spoiled heir, but as a man who'd finally learned the price of truth. The ranch bell tolled. The bank was open. Time to settle accounts. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked like a countdown as Wyatt ran his fingers over his father's desk, the same desk where Robert Blackwood had signed away his life to keep the mine secret. Now here sat Wyatt, about to sign away his soul. Lila's pacing had worn a path in the rug. You're really going to let that old witch win? She spat her jewels glittering like snake scales in the fading light. After everything I've done for you, Wyatt didn't look up. He was too busy staring at the 2 items Magnolia had left on the desk, a deed to the silver mine, and a single train ticket to San Francisco. One way. The choice was clear. Too clear. Lila's reflection appeared in the window behind him, her face twisted into something ugly. You weak sniveling? The sound of shattering glass cut her off as a rock came flying through the window, landing at Wyatt's feet with a thud. Wrapped around it was a note in Jimmy Caldwell's messy scrawl. Silver Creek stage got held up. Bandits took everything, except this. Tied to the rock was Lila's emerald brooch, the one she'd found in Eleanor's jewelry box last Christmas. Wyatt's laugh came out hoarse. Funny. Mama told me she sold this to pay the ranch hands after the blizzard of '78. Lila's face went sheet white. The pieces clicked together. The lost cattle contracts, the missing silverware, even the damn piano she'd insisted they needed. It had all been practice for the big score, the mine. Outside, Judge Caldwell's voice boomed. 5 minutes. Wyatt Bank closes at sundown. Lila lunged for the deed, her manicured nails like talons. Give it to me. Wyatt was faster. He yanked the document away just as the front door burst open, revealing not the judge, but Thaddeus Graves holding a shotgun and grinning like a wolf. Even in children, Maggie sent me to collect her answer. Lila's scream could have shattered glass. "You can't do this, I'm his wife." Thaddeus spat tobacco juice onto her imported rug. "Funny thing about Nevada law, darlin'. Ain't no alimony for gold diggers." He tossed Wyatt a burlap sack that clinked ominously. "Your mama said to give you this after you made your choice." Wyatt didn't need to look inside. The weight told him everything enough silver ore to pay off the ranch 10 times over. The clock struck 6. Lila was still shrieking when Thaddeus dragged her out by the elbow, her silk train ripping on the doorframe. Wyatt didn't watch her go. He was too busy staring at the train ticket in his hand, the one with Eleanor Graves neatly written in the passenger line. Not a surrender. An invitation. The deed burned in his pocket as he rode toward Silver Creek, the wind carrying the distant whistle of the 8:15 to San Francisco. Somewhere ahead his mother was waiting. And for the first time in his miserable life, Wyatt Blackwood couldn't wait to see her. After all, they had 40 years of catching up to do, and a silver mine to run. The grandfather clock struck midnight as Wyatt stared at Lila's trembling hands, hands that had never once bled for this ranch, never once gripped a branding iron or mended a fence, hands that had only ever taken. "You don't mean that—" Lila whispered, her voice suddenly small. "After everything we've—" The screen door slammed open, revealing Judge Caldwell silhouetted against the moonlight, a shotgun resting casually over his shoulder. Banks closed Wyatt. Mortgage is due. He tossed a crumpled telegram onto the table. "Course seems your mama already paid it, again." Lila's breath hitched. "She what?" Wyatt didn't react. His eyes were fixed on the telegram's postmark, Silver Creek 9:07 p.m., sent after he'd left his mother's house, after he'd made his choice. The old judge chuckled. Eleanor added a little note, too. He cleared his throat dramatically. "A real man pays his own debts. This is the last time." Lila's porcelain facade shattered. She lunged for the deed still lying on the desk, but Wyatt was faster. With one fluid motion, he yanked open the drawer where his father had kept his Colt .45, only to find a single silver ingot gleaming in the moonlight, stamped with the Blackwood crest. Thaddeus's laughter echoed from the porch. Maggie always did have a sense of humor. Lila's knees gave out. She collapsed onto the Persian rug she'd bought with ranch money, her sobs echoing through the suddenly cavernous house. "You'll regret this," she hissed between tears. "When she's dead, and you're alone with nothing but your precious pride." Wyatt didn't hear the rest. He was already striding toward the door, the ingot heavy in his pocket. The night air smelled of sage and possibility. Judge Caldwell fell into step beside him. "Silver Creek stage leaves at dawn. Your mama's reserved you a seat." He spat a stream of tobacco into the dirt. "Course there is another option." Wyatt followed the old man's gaze to the barn, where 2 saddled horses stood waiting, one bearing the Blackwood brand, the other with Eleanor's old saddlebags slung over its flank. The message was clear. Come home on your own terms or not at all. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Or maybe it was Thaddeus. Either way, the sound sent a shiver down Wyatt's spine as he reached for the reins. The ranch could wait. It was time to meet his mother, not as a beggar, not as a prodigal son, but as a Blackwood finally worthy of the name. And if Lila's wails of rage followed him into the night, well, that was just the sound of karma collecting its due. The screen door creaked like an old man's bones as Wyatt followed his mother inside. The smell of coffee and gun oil hit him first. Then the sight of Thaddeus Graves lounging at the kitchen table, cleaning a Winchester with the reverence most men reserved for Bibles. "Well, I'll be damned," Thaddeus drawled, not looking up from his work. "The pup's got some spine, after all." Eleanor swatted his arm. "Hush, Tad." The boy made his choice. She poured 3 fingers of whiskey into a tin cup and pushed it toward Wyatt. "Drink that. You look like you've seen a ghost." Wyatt knocked it back in one burning gulp. "Should have seen the one I left behind." Thaddeus barked a laugh. Oh, we saw all right. He jerked his thumb toward the window where Christ Almighty Judge Caldwell stood outside, holding Lila's kicking, screaming form like a misbehaving cougar. Caught the little varmint trying to torch your barn on her way out of town. The whiskey turned to acid in Wyatt's gut. He lunged for the door, only to freeze when Eleanor's hand clamped around his wrist like a bear trap. Sit down, son. The judge has her in hand. Her smile could have chilled hell. Seems my investment in his re-election campaign paid off. Wyatt's knees gave out. He collapsed into a chair as the reality hit him. His mother hadn't just been testing him. She'd been running the whole damn show, from the staged mortgage crisis to the bandits who'd conveniently intercepted Lila's escape. Thaddeus slid a yellowed photograph across the table. Recognize these two handsome devils. The image showed two young men standing before a mine shaft, arms slung over each other's shoulders, one with Wyatt's square jaw, the other with Thaddeus's wolfish grin. But it was the date scrawled in the corner that stole Wyatt's breath, June 1878. A month before Dad died, Wyatt whispered. A month before Robert staged his death, Eleanor corrected gently. She touched the photo with trembling fingers. Your father spent 40 years protecting that mine, and you from men who'd kill for it, even if it meant becoming a ghost in his own son's life. Outside, Lila's shrieks faded into the night as the judge's wagon rolled away. The silence that followed was broken only by the click-click of Thaddeus reassembling his rifle. Wyatt stared at his mother, really stared, seeing for the first time the steel behind her softness, the cunning beneath her kindness. This woman had outmaneuvered them all. So what now, he asked hoarsely. Eleanor's eyes gleamed as she produced a deck of cards from her apron pocket. Now, boy, we play poker. She dealt 3 hands with practiced flicks of her wrist. Time you learned how this family really made its fortune. And as the first cards hit the table, Wyatt Blackwood finally understood. The silver mine was never the inheritance. The game was, and his mother. She'd been the house all along. The morning sun painted the Blackwood Ranch in gold as Wyatt leaned against the porch rail, watching his mother prune her roses with the same precision she'd once used to dismantle his mistakes. 3 months had passed since the reckoning, and the mine's silver now flowed like water, but Eleanor still insisted on hanging her wash by hand. Quit dawdling, boy. Thaddeus called from the corral where he was breaking a stallion with more patience than Wyatt had ever shown anything. Stagecoach arrives at noon, with them Eastern investors. Wyatt spat into the dust. Let 'em wait. Ain't their name on the deed? Eleanor's laugh carried across the yard, warm as whiskey, sharp as a Bowie knife. That's my son. She wiped her hands on her apron, the same faded blue one she'd worn for a decade. Some things it seemed even silver couldn't change. The crunch of wheels on gravel announced Judge Caldwell's arrival, his buggy kicking up dust as it rolled to a stop. Morning Blackwoods. He tipped his hat toward the mine road where a crew was laying new track. Heard y'all bought the railroad now, too. Just a controlling interest, Wyatt drawled, thumbing the silver dollar in his pocket, the first ingot he'd poured himself. The judge's eyes twinkled. Speaking of interests, got a letter from Santa Fe prison. He tossed a yellow envelope to Wyatt. Seems your ex-wife's taken up knitting. Sends her love. Wyatt didn't bother opening it. The fire in the barn last month, the one that mysteriously only consumed Lila's untouched trunks, had been message enough. Eleanor plucked the letter from his fingers and tossed it into her rose bed. Compost needs tending. Her smile could have powered the mine's elevator. Now who's for breakfast? Tad burned the bacon again. As they moved toward the house, Wyatt caught his reflection in the window, the set of his jaw, the calm in his eyes. For the first time, he saw his father staring back. Not the broken man who'd died in a blizzard, but the legend who'd outplayed fate itself. The real inheritance had never been silver. It was the quiet strength to prune dead branches, the wisdom to let poison weeds burn, and the unshakable truth that some women, the rare, dangerous kind, weren't meant to be wives. They were meant to be legends,